one.
Hi everyone, Lindsay Horvath, your mayor here. Wanted to welcome you to the WeHo Reads series. On behalf of all of my colleagues in the city of West Hollywood, it is our absolute pleasure to welcome you. This is part of our city's arts division's efforts to engage people in the creative arts and the literary arts. We have so much fun programming, whether it's our city's poet laureate, who brings such fantastic work to the city, whether it's the Little Free Library series or even Drag Queen Story Hour. We find so many ways to bring the literary arts to our community, to people of all ages in all different ways. I want to thank our staff for the work that they do to make this possible, and for anyone and everyone who is participating today and through the whole series. We hope that you enjoy today's programming and that you'll continue to engage with WeHo, the creative city, and thanks once again on behalf of the city of West Hollywood.
Hi there, my name is Mike Che. I am the arts coordinator for the city of West Hollywood, and I am so pleased to welcome you to tonight's WeHo Reads event. WeHo Reads is produced by the city of West Hollywood with our fabulous guest producers, Amanda Fletcher and Dare Williams, who you'll meet in a moment. Tonight's event is really special. We're so pleased to celebrate Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month with this event, with our speakers tonight, the Academy Award nominated Arthur Dong and National Book Award winner Charles Yu. I've read both their most recent books. They are both fantastic. We'll be sharing links on where you can buy them in the chat with you. And we really hope that you enjoy tonight's event, and thank you for all participating. And I'll turn it over to Amanda, our host for tonight.
Hello, hello, hello. Let's see if we can get this all figured out without looking too crazy. How's everybody doing? Thank you for joining us. I'm Amanda Fletcher, and I am the WeHo Reads co-producer with Dare Williams, who is backstage monitoring the chat. So please drop any questions and comments there, and we'll be sure to forward them on to Arthur and Charles. Thanks again for joining us. Our mission is to amplify and uplift underrepresented writers and their stories, and even to put a few dollars in their pockets, which is super exciting for me because I come from the nonprofit life, and y'all know those folks never have any money. So normally this is when everyone would clap. So if we could get some snaps in the chat, that'd be great. Okay, Amanda, be serious. Here we go. As an expression of our mission, we must respect and uphold the historical and contemporary presence of Indigenous peoples throughout California, especially in the West Hollywood area. We acknowledge that we reside on the historic homeland of Indigenous peoples who were dispossessed of their land. We recognize the Tongva peoples as the traditional land caretakers of Tavongar, situated in the Los Angeles basin. We acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva people. Tonight, we will be creating Hollywood Chinese with Arthur Dong and Charles Yu. A San Francisco Chinatown native, Arthur Dong is an Oscar nominee, a Peabody and Sundance award-winning filmmaker, author, and curator whose work centers on Asian American and LGBTQ, I'm going to add the IA+ stories. Dong's films about Asian American history and culture include The Killing Fields of Dr. Hang Noor, Hollywood Chinese, Forbidden City, USA, and Sewing Women. Among his films on LGBTQ issues are Coming Out Under Fire and License to Kill. Dong has curated exhibitions showcasing his extensive archive of cultural ephemera, including Chop Suey on Wax, the Flower Drum Song album, Forbidden City, USA, and his most recent Hollywood Chinese, on display at the iconic Formosa Cafe in West Hollywood. Dong's first book, Forbidden City, USA, Chinatown Nightclubs, 1936 to 1970, received an American Book Award in 2015. Charles Yu is the author of four 4 books, including his latest, Interior Chinatown, which won the National Book Award for Fiction and was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. He has been nominated for 2 Writers Guild of America awards for his work on the HBO series Westworld, and has also written for shows on FX, AMC, Facebook Watch, and Adult Swim. His fiction and nonfiction have appeared in a number of publications, including The New Yorker, the New York Times Magazine, The Atlantic, Wired, Time, and Plowshares. And you can find him on Twitter at Charles_U. So Arthur and Charles are going to be in conversation until around 7:30, and then we'll break for questions from the audience. So be sure to add whatever you'd like to ask these 2 gentlemen into the chat, and we'll make sure that we turn those over to Arthur and Charlie. But before we start, we have a special treat, and that is the Hollywood Chinese trailer. And I'm going to play that for you right now.
Right now, I think most Americans probably think we all know martial arts.
People think that Asians as people with great mystique and mystery.
I will bring desolation to mankind.
The concern really boils down to, because of years of yellowface in the movies, there's a tremendous lack of Asian Americans telling their own stories.
Envelope, like skin of banana, must be removed to digest contents.
I don't hear any Chinese talking that way, unless they're trying to sound like Charlie Chan.
I did become very fond of Peter Lorre, and so he became one of my main. Yes, please come in.
JJ, get us to see Mr. Mulray.
Very few and far between comes a role like Flower Drum Song. I still get young Asian actors coming up and they say, Nancy, there were no Chinese actors in those days and singing and dancing, and you were hot.
A lot of the Kung Fu movies are from Asia, so the characters were actually more empowered.
When Enter the Dragon came out, walking down the street and everybody would just go, ooh, Bruce Lee, you know?
To see Jackie Chan beat up the white guys, that's a positive thing. But I think our culture has a lot more than that to offer.
There are never enough stories to represent who we are as complex human beings, and with all our diversity and all our individual stories. And so, yes, we'll hope to see more, but we've come a long ways.
Okay, thank you so much for giving that to us, Arthur. Take it away, Arthur and Charles, you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks so much for, to WeHo Reads and to Mike for the introduction as well. And I'm so excited to be here with Arthur. Arthur.
Hey,
hello.
Hi, Charles. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, WeHo Reads. This is quite a thrill. Especially to be here with Charles. And thanks, Charles, for joining us tonight.
Oh, I'm really excited. I loved your book. I loved your movie. I want to get into all of that. Yeah, I've got so many questions for you.
And likewise, me to you as well.
I have to start though. Did you go to the Oscars?
Did I go to this past one?
And when you were nominated, did you get?
Yeah. It was. I was quite young then, and my takeaway from it was, I had only seen it on TV like millions and billions of other people have, and so it was the first time I saw it live, and I was shocked that during the commercials, they had people coming out in tuxedos, sweeping and wiping the floors because they didn't want footprints. And that's a vivid memory for me. And that was kind of my takeaway from it. And also I got to touch Cher's hair. she doesn't know that, but I was behind her and getting in, and she was in front of me, and she had this wild hair, and I was able to touch it. I mean, it's not terrible. I've never said that in public before, but no one's ever asked me how the Oscars was. So that was my takeaway.
That's incredible. I want to ask what her hair felt like, but I assume it felt like unicorn and silk or something.
Well, I don't think it was her real hair. I think she had. I don't know if they had invented extensions back then, but it felt really, what I remember is coarse. So it was either a lot of hairspray or it was just extensions. But anyway, sorry, Cher. Now she'll probably be like, gosh, in this current environment, that is probably, now that I think about it, not a cool thing to have done.
Possibly, yeah, probably not. But your candid honesty is appreciated. And not many people can say that they've been to the Oscars. So that's incredible.
And were the National Book Awards, were they virtual this year?
They were. So I did it in my living room. My family was all around me, and I put on a suit.
You did? You mean like top to bottom? Did you wear like the bottom was your suit pants as well?
I thought about maybe skating by with jeans. I mean, shorts would probably be too risky because you never know. Like if I have to get up and run out of the room for some reason. But yeah, I put on a suit top to bottom, which is the first time I had done it in like a year. So yeah, and then I took it off, changed back into shorts, and ate pizza with my family. It's pretty fun.
Yeah. I think another thing I remember was there's this governor's ball after the Oscars, and the table next to us, Michael Jackson was sitting at the table next to us. So that was pretty, I was going to say a thrill, but like Thriller. But anyway, so I remember that too. And what was interesting was, I was nominated in the documentary category, and a lot of the independent filmmakers who were a part of the ceremonies that year, we all chipped in and hired a bus, a luxury bus, to take us all in because it just was more convenient. So we actually arrived by bus.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, not in the limo because we couldn't. No one could afford a limo at that time, and well, I can't even today. But so we all hired a bus. So that was a lot of fun actually.
I love the idea of team documentary showing up, in solidarity. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And did you? But you didn't all leave together. You took taxis home or something, or did you?
I don't remember. I think I don't really remember.
Yeah.
And I have very few pictures. We didn't have cell phones back then, so there are very few pictures of that night that I know of.
Yeah, I can imagine after seeing Cher and Michael Jackson, the rest of the night is kind of a blur.
Yeah, I mean, I was done. It was okay. I did it.
Yeah.
But
amazing.
Ever since then, I had, because I was the Academy governor for a couple of terms, and part of the perks of being governor is that you get tickets to the Oscars. So I had been there since, and those commercials got longer and longer every year, which meant, you went out to the bar for a longer time every year during the commercial breaks. But you had to always come back because they shut the doors on you. If you don't come back in time, you can't come in because they don't want people kind of milling around.
So by the end, people have had, if they've been drinking, have had opportunity to have quite a few. Like,
and there's there's the pre-Oscar receptions.
So people are already showing up.
Oh yeah, you can show up as early as 3:00. I think they opened the doors at 2:00, in fact, and the champagne is just flowing in the lobbies. So yeah, you can get pretty wasted. Anyway, but
Well,
yeah.
well, it's a great movie and it's a great book. And, I wanted to ask you about the title. I think it's such a perfect title, creating Hollywood Chinese. Well, I mean, Hollywood Chinese already is a title, but I think this, how did it happen? I mean, I read that you also have a collection, right, of these items. So you're a historian and you've made a movie and you write about it, but you also actually own a lot of the things that are in the book. Is that right?
Yeah, I've been collecting movie memorabilia since I was a kid. I started doing that living in San Francisco, Chinatown, and where there were 5 movie theaters within the 6-block radius of Chinatown, all showing Chinese movies. And what they did is they printed out flyers every week for the program. And my sister and I collected them, and I still have them. I mean, I have a whole stack of them. So I started collecting movie memorabilia since the 1960s, and it got really intense during my research for Hollywood Chinese, the documentary, because I really wanted to see what the marketing was like for Hollywood films that had Asian Chinese characters, whether they were played by Chinese Asians or not. I was really interested in how the publicity machine worked in Hollywood for these kind of films, what was being said about these films, whether from the public's point of view or the marketing department at the studios, and how they were pushing the films out to the public. So I started collecting material for research. And by the time I had finished the documentary, I probably collected over 1,500 pieces of cultural ephemera about movies that had Chinese characters. And the Chinese American Museum here in LA found out and said, well, what about an exhibition? And so I had curated other exhibitions before, but it seemed like the perfect opportunity to bring this material out. And as a museum goer, I love looking at the real thing. I mean, I think there's a trend in museums now to reproduce items and blow them up and show them in great detail, which is important. I think that's an effective way as well. But personally, I like to see the real thing, even if I can't touch it. And just to know that item in that glass case represented so many ideas and so many efforts to market or to show, and I feel like it's a way to go back into time when I see the actual material. So it was quite exciting. And then even with the exhibition, it was limited to 200 pieces because of the size of the museum. And I said, well, this stuff, I think it's pretty fascinating. And luckily I found collaborators to believe that as well, particularly my publisher, Angel City Press. And when I approached them, I think it was even through the first inquiry, as a writer, sometimes it's hard to get through, right? To publishers and to the editors. But I think from the first email, it was instant. It was like, yeah, come on over. And luckily, come on over was easy because they're in Santa Monica. So it's not like I had to fly to New York or some exotic place. It's just a drive to Santa Monica. And the first meeting was, yeah, let's do it. And I sat there and I said, what, I got a contract? He says, yeah. So they were excited about it. I got excited about it. The designer got excited about it. And then the book got done. Yeah. So that's kind of in a nutshell how that happened.
I love that. I mean, it's such a perfect story, a rare story. I don't think people usually just walk in and walk out with a book contract usually, but I can see why. I mean, it's such a the book itself is a beautiful object, and it captures, these, so many of these posters and marketing materials. I think it would be a very different thing to actually see it in person, I assume, but I still, it's almost overwhelming. I feel like what you've done is assembled really like a walk through time and a walk through kind of this cultural space of like, look at how they marketed these things. And you mentioned that, and what were they marketing? You know, I mean, I think that's really reductive, but like some of the early ones, you know, they're, you know, I think, to say the least, would be very offensive by, you know, today's standards. But there's a clear kind of aesthetic, you know, there's a clear kind of I don't know, it feels very much like they're appealing to a certain part of the viewer's psyche. They're saying, come watch this. What did people want to watch? Was it the exotic other? I mean,
well, there wasn't a one size fit all in terms of marketing plans and strategies. I think a lot depended on the social, political, cultural events of that time. For example, if you go back to the early 1900s, the first couple decades of that century, the 1900s, there was a lot of animosity towards Chinese. The Boxer Rebellion was going on. The Chinese were seen as the yellow horde, yellow peril. So a lot of the films reflected those kind of caricatures. But if you go into the 30s and 40s, particularly when China was an ally during the World War II effort against the onslaught of the fascist countries and governments, then the Chinese were portrayed in the more positive light. You take a film like The Good Earth. That was The Good Earth, which is based, just for those who aren't familiar with that film, it's based on a Pearl S. Buck novel about Chinese peasants. And Pearl S. Buck is quite well known as an author who was trying to portray a more sensitive human portrayal of the Chinese. Whether or not she succeeded, that depends on the reader. But at that time, in the 30s, she was already a Pulitzer Prize winning author, particularly for The Good Earth. And the studios wanted to adapt that book into a film, and the producer, Irving Thalberg, who was known as kind of like the boy wonder of MGM during the 30s, really wanted to do good and correct some of the Fu Manchu, the dehumanizing images that were made by Hollywood in the first 3 decades of the 19th century. And he really wanted to, I think he was sincere in wanting to make a film that the Chinese would be proud of. So, and then if you move on into the 60s, it was a different period. Civil rights movement was going on. I think the cultural identity and the identities of ethnic communities, particularly the African American community and the Chinese community and the Asian community, it was on the verge of exploding in terms of being aware of those issues. So there were actually a few films in the 60s that were I think, sincere efforts in trying to capture that feeling. And then of course, in present day is quite a different picture. So I think it's not a one size fits all in terms of the studios and what they were trying to do. It really depended on what was going on in the world and current events.
In The Good Earth specifically, I found this really fascinating in the book. Correct me if I'm wrong, Arthur. They were looking at Anna May Wong as possibly playing one of the lead roles, right? She was one of the final few. And you have documentation of basically, is it her screen test or just like the studio evaluation of why they didn't end up going with her, and they ended up casting, now her name's escaping me, not Anna May Wong.
Not Anna May Wong person. Yeah. She would probably croak if she heard you say that, but she's dead. Okay, so it's okay. She won't hear you say that because she's so proud of her work. Louise Rayner.
Right.
Yeah,
and she's in your film as well, right?
Yes, and there's an extended interview of her in the book as well. I'm not sure if she was in the final roster of possibilities for the main part played by Louise Rayner, Olan, but she did audition for sure for the role of Lotus, which was the concubine role. it was well known that she lobbied for the lead role. She had just come off, not just, but a few years prior, just a couple of years prior, finished Shanghai Express, where she starred opposite Marlene Dietrich. And she was just wonderful in that film. And the critics loved her, the public loved her. So she felt that, well, of course they would consider her seriously. But as far as I know, and we don't have full documentation, and I'm not sure if we ever will, I'm not sure if the studios ever really seriously considered her for the main role, but they did audition her for the concubine role. And she famously did not want that role, although she auditioned for it, but she did not want that role because she goes, if I'm not going to play the lead role, why are you going to give me the concubine role? I mean, again, playing off the stereotypic role of Chinese women being vamps, prostitutes, and the other. And the casting notes actually are pretty damning from the associate producer, Albert Lewin, I think. Albert, I think is the first name. Lewin, I know for sure the surname is Lewin, but I'm paraphrasing, basically said that she wasn't as beautiful as one would think to be a concubine. It's like, whoa,
Yeah.
this is amazing. And so it was very disappointing. But what Anna May Wong did, instead of being a victim of the circumstance, was she actually went to China right after that and shot a documentary of her vision of China, which never got released until the 50s. I think 50s, late 50s or early 60s. No, late 50s, mid 50s. And it never got released until the 50s. But she made her own documentary of what China was to her.
Yeah, that's what a lot of things strike me of what you just said, but what's so interesting is that someone like Anna May Wong could make such an inroad into Hollywood to the point where she's a known quantity. I mean, she's starring opposite Marlene Dietrich, and then I guess it's overly reductive, but sometimes you think of progress as this kind of linear thing. It's like, oh, once someone breaks open a barrier, it's going to incrementally get better from that. And the reality is much more complex, which that even after she exists and is castable, you still have Hollywood wanting to go back to things like Yellowface, that they will actually just say, no, we're good. We don't need a star. We'll just use our white star and, use the methods we have to do Yellowface. And you document that too. I thought that was so interesting that there were sort of, I'm paraphrasing, but, sort of three methods of basically whitewashing. One would just be excluding Asian actors from having the role at all. Two would be to whitewash, to rewrite a part so that it wasn't Asian. And three would just be, makeup and Yellowface itself. I was just wondering if you could talk at all about any of that. If I just thought that was so interesting, specifically the methods and the lengths to which they went, to, I guess, portray the Hollywood version of what an Asian face looks like.
Well, I just want to backtrack to the beginning of your comment. Yes, Anna May Wong starred opposite Marlene Dietrich, but she was cast as a prostitute. She was a prostitute. So it was easy, I think, for Hollywood to say, yes, we'll have a real Chinese because she's a prostitute. Of course, that's fine. And it wasn't until Anna May Wong struck out with more independent films where she was given starring roles. I mean, the starring role as opposed to a supporting role. And particularly, we're talking about the politics at the time, particularly in the 40s, she made a handful of independent films to carry out her efforts to support China. Films about Chinese characters in China fighting against the fascists. So she did what she could, and of course now she's an icon, and we honor that, her decades-long effort. In terms of the three levels of excluding Asians or Chinese in Hollywood, yeah, it's either you don't get in it at all, you're just totally cut out, or you're created in yellowface, or your character becomes not Asian. Your character, even most recently, what's that film with Emma Stone? Is it Aloha?
Yeah, the Cameron Crowe movie. Yeah,
and she played the Chinese character, right?
Right.
And there was like no effort to hide the fact that she's not Asian. It's like, even I think in the movie was her character,
a quarter
name was Chinese, right?
Yeah, I think a quarter Chinese.
I mean, she doesn't even, I mean, you know, she didn't even look mixed. I didn't even try to, I mean, it's like, that was really, that, I think it was, you remember the Golden Globes a couple of years ago, when Angela, Sandra Oh, Angela O's the attorney in Koreatown. Sandra Oh won her Golden Globe, right? And she was on stage and she talked about yellowface or just being replaced by white actors. And Emma Stone was in the audience. She's Emma Stone. She goes, I'm sorry. It was actually quite a telling moment for Hollywood. So, and then of course, there's the whole yellowface idea. And I want to, yellowface, and just quickly for folks who aren't familiar with that term, it's like blackface, where they hire a person not from that group to portray a character of that group by makeup and or other things like eyepieces. And one thing I found fascinating in researching yellowface was, and I really had to see, part of me as a researcher, what I try to do is get myself into the minds of the people at that time. What were they thinking? What way were they doing? And what I found was, makeup artists, they were really trying to be artists. I mean, their assignment was to turn Boris Karloff into Fu Manchu, right? That's the job. That's the makeup artist. And the creative challenge was to do that. How best to do that? Now, did these makeup artists have any kind of political wherewithal or thoughts about casting and whether it was right or not? I'm not sure. I don't believe so. And in the writings, what I read are derogatory terms for certain ethnic groups when they describe the process, but they really approached it as an artist. And as an artist myself, part of me wants to acknowledge that and say, okay, as an artist, you're doing this work. But where is your awareness of what was going on? But then in the 30s and 40s, was there any awareness? There wasn't. Whereas today, my table's wood, knocking on wood, it would never happen again, right? But
probably not.
Probably
Who knows?
not.
Who knows?
But
First I never.
Yeah, you just never know. But time's kind of running, and I have a burning question actually for you.
Oh, okay.
About your book, Interior Chinatown. It's just a wonderful book, and I think okay, and I haven't read every review or every think piece or cultural essay on your book. I read a bit, and what I had read before I picked up your book was that it was a film about Hollywood and this mistreatment of Chinese or Chinese American characters. Mostly, that's what I knew about it. And so I picked it up with that in mind, that it was going to be about a book about how Hollywood and deals with Chinese Americans or the characters of that group. But for me, and it is certainly about that, But for me, what really struck me was it was a book about immigrants. It was about characters I grew up with. It was, and I was just riveted by your storytelling about my people, not about Hollywood. I mean, maybe it's because I knew a lot about the business of Hollywood in regards to Chinese American characters. So I wasn't as intrigued, although the writing was very intriguing. I mean, your style of writing is just fascinating. So people who haven't read it, that's if there was only going to be one reason, that's the reason to read your book. But for me, what I couldn't put down was the whole idea of this story, this way of telling a story about immigrants and Chinese in America. So what I wanted to know was what came first? Is it kind of a chicken and egg question? Did you set out or think you were going to write a book about Hollywood, or were you really set out to write a book about immigrants or Chinese Americans?
Oh, yeah. No, thank you for reading it. And thanks for, your insights. I think that I think that it was really fascinating to read your book as a kind of, I feel like our books are talking to each other across time, Yeah. I would have loved to have had your book as a resource when I was writing it. And I'm currently adapting, Interior Chinatown, trying to make it into a show for Hulu. And I'm just finding myself constantly referring back to your book. So if we get to make a show, I might have to try to hire you as a consultant, but I don't want to put the cart before the horse. I think so many of the things you describe are things that I was interested in as I was writing. But you're right to say that, or the way you framed it is really interesting, because it really did start as a story about immigrants. My parents are Taiwanese. They came from Taiwan in the 60s, and my wife is Cantonese, and her family's been in the Bay Area for a few generations. And I've heard stories from my parents and my in-laws, over the years. And I wanted a place to write about those stories. I wanted those feelings, those experiences, not so much as biography, but as, the seed of a certain kind of sensibility or a feeling, I guess, or a bunch of feelings about what it's like to be seen as this, foreigner, what it must have been like for my parents when they first got to the US in the 60s, and they both ended up in the South, actually. How did they feel? How did they get through the day? How did they make friends, and how do they learn how to be Americans, I guess, or I just, so that was the emotional core. And then from it came this idea of, Willis Wu, who's this background character. And that's when I started to think, oh, this is an interesting way in possibly to talk about what it's like, what it must have been like for these immigrants. And to some extent, I would say for the children of these immigrants, for the offspring, to be sort of feel like you're not quite in the center of things, still feel like you're marginalized, even, I was born here, my kids were born here. And yet we still look the way we look. And a lot of that experience, for whatever reason, the metaphor of like background Asian person fits so perfectly that, that's how it came out.
So what I find interesting, and I think after I read a couple of chapters, and where you start really going into the characters and their background, especially the father, the Sifu with the character, I looked at the back copy of the book, I said, wait a minute, this book isn't about Hollywood. I mean, it was about Hollywood, but I said, wait, and I reread the copy in the back. And I said, did I make a mistake? Did I misunderstand what this book was going to be? Because for me, again, it really struck me as a story about immigrants and first generation Chinese here in America. And even the copy really focused on Hollywood. And I think this is the paperback version. And, I may be wrong, but the emphasis was on Hollywood and how Hollywood treated Chinese and Chinese Americans. So I'm wondering, knowing now the answer you've just given me, whether it was a chicken or egg first, was it the marketing plan to push it as a story about Hollywood and the dilemmas of Chinese and Chinese American actors in Hollywood, and kind of lessen the story as a story about immigrants? I mean, was there a marketing plan, a strategy behind that?
That's a good question. The thing, I would say my editor, my publisher, everyone there definitely understood, the core of the story is about these immigrants and about this experience. I think, there's a kind of craft and art to, to writing. You've published many books, but like to writing copy, I guess, right? To writing flap copy, because it feels like you're trying to position and package the thing in a way that's honest, but has a little bit of the sizzle to it. And I think what happens sometimes is one particular facet gets a little bit of the attention, either picked up in early reviews, or it's just the easiest thing to focus on. Because I've found that even a lot of people who have like reviewed the book in depth and have read it clearly I think in the way that you're talking about it, it can still be easy when you shorthand it to describe it as a Hollywood satire. And so I guess that's all my kind of hedgy way of saying, I think it was a smart angle to take, but it is a little bit deceiving. But that's what sort of things are. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like if it brings more people to the story, then great. But at the same time, there is something about, I don't know.
Well, to be honest, when particularly when I talk about the documentary and the book Hollywood Chinese in public, in the bottom line, I'll say, really what I'm talking about is race.
Yeah.
But that's not how the book is marketed. That's just mirroring what you're saying about the marketing of your book and what is the emphasis that the copy is, what is being pushed out there in the public. And I'm not in disagreement with the marketing strategy for my book, in that it doesn't right off say, this is a book about race and race relations. But that's my inner core. That's why, if as a storyteller, I believe there has to be a clear focus. And then there's all the other tangents and the sub stories and the supporting character, all the other ideas that make up the core story. But my core story is that Hollywood Chinese is about race. It's about how we treat each other in terms of race relations in this country. But then I know the marketing isn't that. And I've never been uncomfortable with that. So it's good to hear that you went through the same thing with your book, because so I guess I'm thinking, oh, good. I don't feel like I should feel like I'm selling out. And I think oftentimes when I'm making a film, I have to think in those terms too. What will resonate to a larger public? Because I want these ideas to resonate to beyond and I don't want to preach to the choir. I wanted to go beyond the groups in which I'm writing or making a film about, because the issues related really need to go further out. For me, I mean, that I want them to go further out to a broader audience. And sometimes I know that in order to do that, not that you're cleansing or whitewashing or taking out the particular details. It's just that it's framed in a certain way that can be understood by many different people. There's one thing I really want to ask you about.
Okay.
Is
and then we're getting back to your book. You're doing a good job of sneaking in questions for me.
I
said I wouldn't let you do this, but
okay. But I really want to know. Well, I really want to know about your writing about the SROs. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, it's the single resident occupants, right? As where large buildings are residential buildings are divided up so that each residence has one room, and they share a bathroom, they share a kitchen, and many Chinese and Chinese immigrants live in these situations. And I found it fascinating the way you described the SRO living conditions in your book, because I have personal relations with the SRO. My Chinese music teacher lived in the SRO on the outskirts of Chinatown in the North Beach area of San Francisco. And I went to his one room for, gosh, I think it was for at least 5, if not 10 years, every week to take lessons in this one room. And my uncle lived in an SRO right in the heart of Chinatown, and I would every week deliver food to him that my mom cooked, homemade food. So I would deliver it to his, because we lived in Chinatown, but further away from his, in our outskirts of China. I would hand deliver the food to him in his SRO room. So the way you describe the conditions, the smells, the 5 dialects being spoken at the same time, this cacophony of sounds and smells, it was just really quite vivid. And it just brought me, I hadn't thought about SROs until I read your book. So I wanted to know, where did that all come from?
Yeah. And I don't know if I don't want to slow the flow, but I think you had a picture. So if you've, did you have a picture? Was that one of the pictures that you wanted to?
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to.
Okay.
Share screen this, unless Amanda, I was waiting for Amanda to tell us she got them, but I don't see it in the chat column.
Hi, I didn't get them. I keep looking, but I didn't get them yet.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. You know what? Go to my website. So you can see excerpts from one of my films about my music teacher, actually.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. You know, for me, I watched some documentaries and read about them, and I haven't lived in one, and I don't have family that has, but you know, I went to Berkeley, and so going to Oakland or San Francisco and seeing Chinatown, and you know, spending a little bit of time there, you know, it just struck me as, one, this is where these characters would live. This is realistically where they would live, and then it worked out also in the kind of Hollywood context, because it felt like that's backstage. You know, that's the part that we don't see. The Asians all kind of sleep in this dorm, you know, in my novel, and then they come downstairs to work, and their work is at this restaurant, and that's front stage when they play waiters and, you know, and like concubines and that sort of thing. So all of their kind of audience facing life is in the restaurant, and all of their real life, you know, their actual human existence is hidden in the SRO. And I just, you know, it felt like this weird kind of confluence of like actual fact with the story that I was trying to tell. So but yeah, I really wish I had your brain to pick while I was, and maybe I'll try to pick your brain in the future.
Well, you didn't need to, because you did it was just extraordinary when I was reading your description of the living conditions. There was one phrase, one section, you were describing the men gambling on the 8th floor, specifically the 8th floor, which is a good luck Chinese number, right? 8. And you call them the generic Asian men, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
And then in the next phrase, you say, but they all had names. And I think for the next 2 paragraphs, you list all these surnames. Is that
yeah, that's right.
And I said, wow, which is why I did some of the films I made, specifically the one about my Chinese music teacher and also the film about my mom, sewing woman, because I used to work as a social worker, employment interviewer in San Francisco, Chinatown. I was somewhat bilingual, so I interviewed hundreds of immigrants looking for work, including a lot of sewing women, or women who would want to work in a sewing factory. And my mom was a sewing factory worker. And I wanted to do these films about specifically my mom and my music teacher because they've got names, they've got stories, they've got histories. And so when I read that one section in your book and they all had names and you list all these Chinese surnames, it's just like, what? It felt really great. It's like, yes, this is why this book is so fascinating. And in a way, so
yeah.
So you didn't need to consult my brain for that because you did it.
Well, thank you. I definitely could have used it though. And yeah, I was wondering how many names can I get away with? At some point I was like, I really need to fill this book out if I could do 10 pages of names. And
I'm glad your editor didn't say, oh, 1 paragraph is, I think was it 2 paragraphs?
Yeah, it goes on for a little bit.
Yeah. But I read each one of them.
You were talking about that your work in this book even specifically is about race. In putting it together though, and then echoing or going back to another thing you said, which is you do have a real empathy for the artists, like you said, not just the makeup artist, but I think even in the way you handle the interview with someone like Christopher Lee when he's talking about playing Fu Manchu. I thought that was such an interesting thing because you use such a I don't know if neutral is the right word, but you are coming at it, I think, from an artist talking to someone who clearly cared about his craft and portrayal of that and his art, I guess. I was wondering if if there either that interview or any of the other interviews you, in terms of talking to people in that sort of period who were part of that system, what you learned, what surprised you, or just sort of how did you feel about those conversations?
Well, there are 3 interviews in the film and in the book as well. Of non-Asian people playing Asian characters, Chinese characters. Louise Rayner, who played Olan in The Good Earth, Christopher Lee, who played Fu Manchu in, is it 5 or 6? At least 5, if not 6 films. And Turhan Bey, who played Chinese peasant in The Dragon Seed, another Pearl Buck book. He claims he's part Asian because he's Turkish. So he goes, oh yeah, I'm part Asian anyway, so it's okay. But anyway, what I wanted to do was to get into their place, into their experience of playing Chinese characters and putting on the makeup, putting on an accent. Turhan Bey actually didn't put on an accent, putting on the costumes of a Chinese character. And what did that process mean to them? And how did they go about that process? And with Christopher Lee, I mean, he was quite a gentleman. We know him as Saruman in The Lord of the Rings and the vampire movies from Hammer Films and the Hammer Studios in the 60s. but he was just such a gentleman. And Turin Bay was quite a gentleman too. He served me Coke. It was warm Coke. He was living by himself, you know. We interviewed him in his home in Vienna. Is it Vienna? Yeah, I think it was Vienna. I had to look that up. It's in the book, anyway, where I interviewed him. Yes, it was Vienna. And Christopher Lee, we interviewed him in London. And he was like, we did it in a hotel because he didn't want us to go to his home. But he said, well, he basically said, well, whatever you want, I'm here. And he kind of, after the interview, he kind of hung out with the crew and kind of chit-chatted. And but it was interesting. In the interview, I wanted him to talk. I asked him about The Good Earth. I asked him about Louise Rayner. I asked him about Paul Muni, who played opposite Louise Rayner. And what was interesting was he didn't want to really be negative. And he did approach it as an artist, like they were doing their roles. He felt that it was possibly unfair to Chinese actors at that time, but they were doing the job. And for him, he hated playing Fu Manchu, but he was doing a job. I mean, he really emphasized that it was a job and he was making a living for himself, as well as Sai Chen, who you may know from the Joy Luck Club, one of the moms, Auntie Lindo, in the Joy Luck Club. She played the daughter of Fu Manchu. Mm-hmm. And in her interview, she emphasized that, yeah, of course, it was terrible, but, you know, I got to live. I got to make a living. As an actor, you do things that you may not be very proud of, but you do them because you have to make a living. And I had to put aside any kind of misgivings I had about yellow facing or playing stereotype roles, playing a vamp or playing, you know, a warlord, and understand what it meant for a working actor to have to play these roles. Because I have contemporary friends who are actors and they play these roles. Less and less these days, but they're still asking to do that. Like the characters in your book, they're asked to put on the accent. They're asked to play the kung fu guy. And they're done with. They're in the background. So I think this was partly out of respect, but also partly to try to understand for real where they're coming from. And Louise Rayner, and I think she wouldn't mind me saying this, but she was a real queen. You know, she was a real diva. And she was, you know, glamorous Hollywood from the golden age of the 30s. And she knew exactly what she wanted and how to do it. She knew where the lights should be. She knew when the sound wasn't quite right. It was a very fascinating, her interview. And afterwards, she go, you know, actually I have footage of this because my husband was shooting videotape us, just, you know, kind of on the spot video with a handy cam, not with the professional camera. And it's funny, he followed us as we walked out of the hotel room where we shot the interview into the elevator, into her car. He just ran the camera following us. And she was, did I do okay? Are you happy? You know, did I do what you wanted? She was really trying to please the director, which she, as a trained actress, knew you know, she had that in her. And, you know, speaking of being a director, I am noticing that the sun has gone down and I need to actually turn on the light. Am I getting dark, Amanda? Should I turn up the light? I can see
you look great. You look great, but if you want to turn it up, you can turn it up.
Oh, no, that's okay. It's fine. It must be my monitor then. Okay, so let me know if I need to do that. I can turn up the lights. Anyway, so yeah, those were my memories of the actors I interviewed who played Yellowface. And I think there was a moment, I don't think it's in the film. It's not in the film, and it's not in the extended transcripts that are in the book of the interview of Louise Rayner. And it's where I wanted her to talk about Anime Wong and her not being cast in the role that she got, and which she got her second straight in row back-to-back Oscar for. And I can kind of paraphrase, but it was more her look. It was, I'm not going to try to act like Louise Rayner, but it was what she was trying to say in her body language and the words she chose to say at that moment when I asked her about Anime Wong was, oh, no, not Anime Wong. It's like, no, she can't do this. Of course, she has she's biased because she did it, right? And she won the Oscar for it. But I wanted her to talk. She kind of didn't want to talk about Anime Wong. But her attitude was, no, she could have never done this. And it was partly not in those words, but it was her body language, her rhythm of her speech, and the words she chose, in which I surmised that that's what she was saying. It was pretty clear, though. But she was, anyway.
Sorry, no, that's incredible. I didn't mean to cut you off. Keep going.
Oh, no, that's just... Oh, and I mean, you wanted some stories.
Yes.
Behind the scenes. Well,
stories.
Louise Rayner, I actually spent a couple of days in her apartment. Not whole days, but
this is quite an interview that happened.
She lived in this really elegant apartment in London. And one day, I was there a few days before the interview because I wanted to acclimate. And remember the summer of 2003? It was the hottest day ever in London. That's the day, that was the week we arrived to do the interview. It was like scorching and the whole city was melting. It was 2004, something like that. But I kept one of the newspaper front pages, hottest day or scorching day in London. I still have it. But she had me come over to her apartment to help her pick out a wardrobe. She goes, well, here, and I went through her closet and she goes, help me pick out something. She goes, what should I do with my hair? And so we said, well, because she had taken some photos with her beret. And I said, well, that's quite elegant. I think that's what, I had met her at the Oscars one year when they were doing the anniversary. I think it was the 75th anniversary, and they invited all the living actors who won Oscars, and she flew in that year. She wore a beret. I said, well, that was a good look when I first met you. She goes, oh, wouldn't. Anyway, that was very sweet. Helping her pick out what to wear.
That is sweet.
You
interviewed
story.
No, that's a great story. I there's so many other people you interviewed. We saw Ang Lee and Joan Chen, and in your book, Nancy Kwan and Wayne Wong. I mean, so many. You've talked to it's like, I guess, royalty of I think in a way
at that time. I mean, they still are royalty, but I think it goes back to the marketing. Well, that's part of it. And I'm going to use the word casting. In putting together and developing the documentary, I cast certain roles. I wanted an ingenue, I wanted a director, I wanted a director who was born and nurtured and really whose identity was not America. I wanted a gay actor, a gay identified actor. There were certain roles that I had carved out in terms of what I was looking for and the issues I wanted to explore in the documentary. And that's how I kind of cast the people I asked to be interviewed for the film. And the other part was, I knew that at that time, and we're talking about the mid 2000s, which is a little different. It was quite a different time than it is now in terms of the broader awareness of the problems of casting Chinese or Asian characters in Hollywood. I mean, it's much more part of the dialogue now that that's out there in terms of yellow face casting or whitewashing. But in the 2000s, it really wasn't on the front burner. So I self-challenged myself. I said, okay, I want to make this film. I think it's important. I think there are a lot of stories to be told and a lot of issues to explore. But how am I going to get a broader audience that may not be interested in the plight of Chinese or Chinese American artists in Hollywood? They might be interested in film history, or they might be attracted to big names like Amy Tan. And because I would have these people in the film, they might tune in. So that was a part of the strategy as well in choosing the people I asked to be in the film. And there are names that aren't quite as well known as Amy Tan, like Lisa Liu, but once you see her face, you know who she is. Right. You know, so each one of them though played a specific set of experiences, their own experiences, but in terms of representation, in terms of what they represented, in terms of the bigger picture of the Hollywood experience for Chinese and Chinese Americans, I kind of put them in a specific place.
There's I'm sure you know, but James Hong is having a bit of a, I don't know, not a renaissance, but I think people are finally appreciating the kind of breadth and length of his career, I guess. You interview him as well. He has some really interesting comments. And just to think of what his career has spanned over the decades is kind of amazing.
Well, when I had known, actually, I worked with his daughter in one of my films. So I've known James, we call him Jimmy, for a long time. And I've known him for decades. And so I watched his daughter grow up, and it's actually pretty exciting. And she's now an acting coach. And I've always admired him. And really, okay, for those who don't know James Hong, you'll know him if you see him. I'm sorry, we're going to put a picture of him. He's the guy.
Google him right now.
Yeah, Google him. Right. He's the guy in the Blade Runner, the Eye Doctor. He's the butler in Chinatown. He's the guy that is in the Ziegfeld, the Chinese waiter role, which he's very famous for. Anyway, so he played over 500 roles, so you know him if you see his face. And I had seen some pretty serious efforts by him in larger roles, like The Idol, a French film, which is one of his favorites. There's a film he did with Deborah Winger, Black Widow. He plays a drug addict lawyer. It's just fantastic. And I wanted to bring that out. And specifically with James Hong, and what was surprising, I think one of the questions you had for me was, what surprised you? Was during the interview, he talked about a film called Confessions of an Opium Eater, which is a 1962-61 film, I think, with Vincent Price. But it's all about opium dens, hatchet men, lecherous Chinese men after slave girls. And it was the worst of stereotypes. And I had really not known about this film a lot. It's a very low budget film, didn't get wide distribution. But he started talking about it, and he remembered, the story is in a nutshell, he remembers when the filmmakers came to LA and started casting for this film. And he goes, what the heck? This is 1960. How can you be making this film? And he lamented that, you know, actors have to make a living, and some of his colleagues were auditioning and getting hired. And I have to, now the filmmakers did kind of make a promise to the Chinese or Asian American community that they weren't going to do anything really terrible. They lied. It was terrible. And so there was, Victor Sin Yin's in it. Nobuko, I just know her by first. The dancer, she's in it. Anyway, he was so upset when the film came out that he and other fellow actors, including Mako, Bill Kuo, Sun Teko, and a bunch of others, got together and said, you know, enough of this. We're going to form our own group and produce our own work. And I don't have to name up the group in my head right now, but it's in the book. But that eventually morphed into East West Players, which is a theatrical, Asian American theatrical group here in LA, still in existence. So I'm bringing this up because I was really surprised. I didn't know this story. And it was fascinating to hear, and it's prominent in my book. But, you know, it shows that people, they weren't just sitting around being a victim. As Anna Mae Wong wasn't sitting around being a victim, there are heroic stories where they said, well, enough of this, we're going to do it ourselves. And that was very important to me to really flesh out.
Yeah, I love that about the book. What you said, it was heroic. It must have taken really a lot of guts, because it was hard enough for them to get work as it was. I mean, how many roles were there, and how often could they even get one of these major studio jobs, and then to actually be trying to speak, you know, truth to the system and change things when there already was such a precarious position. You know, it's really, it takes a lot of guts, but it also was really illuminating to see just sort of, I guess, how long the fight has been, you know, that the people have been taught. He was trying to do this, I guess, in the 60s, right? I mean, they were already Anna Mae Wong even before that. And what do you think?
We can go further back.
Yeah.
You know, we can go back, because the earliest Chinese American filmmaker I have in the book is 1917, Marianne Wong, who did a feature film in Oakland, not in Hollywood, but in Oakland, of all places, Oakland, California, right? Across the bay from San Francisco. Not even in San Francisco, which is in Oakland.
Yeah.
And she made a feature film because she was tired of the crap. And then here in LA was Jane Speedy Young in 1921, I think, or it's the early 20s, I don't have it in my head, did a feature film called Lotus, tinted in color. And then in the 30s and 40s, you have someone like Joseph Sanju in San Francisco, Chinatown, and in the 40s, making about 20 feature films in Chinatown about Chinese Americans, with Chinese American actors speaking Cantonese, not English, but speaking Cantonese. And so the fight has actually been going on for a long time, or the struggle to rise above the Hollywood crap, but you know, junk. I don't know what to call it. And then with your book coming out, really framing it with the whole idea of kung fu characters in Hollywood films, it's the fight is still there. There's this. Have you seen what's the new series that came out on CW?
I think it's Kung Fu, right?
Oh, Kung Fu, yeah. And then there's Warriors, right?
Yes, also Warrior.
HBO or Cinemax. I think it's on HBO now.
Yeah.
And you know, I want to talk to you about Kung Fu. Actually, that was something in my mind. Okay. Your framework is totally Kung Fu, right? That's an important frame. What is it about Kung Fu for you personally?
Well, you know, I think so. Yeah, for people that haven't read or know anything about my book, Willis Wu is an Asian actor, and he exists in this kind of world that's a little bit like a Law and Order type police procedural called Black and White. And so where there's one black lead and one white lead. And so Willis, as a generic Asian man, feels like the only thing he can aspire to, the highest he can aspire to be, is Kung Fu guy. That's the ceiling, and that's the bamboo ceiling for him. You know, to me, it was a couple of things. It's like, that's what I grew up watching in the 80s and 90s. If you saw an Asian on screen, they were probably either doing martial arts, or it was something food related, you know, or it was a story about, you know, Chinatown. You know, it was set like there were gangs, or there was some kind of trafficking going on, usually some version of that story. So there's both the stereotype, and then there's Bruce Lee. There's for a kid growing up without any other I don't want to say without any other role models, that's not it, but to have someone like Bruce Lee actually be, universally acknowledged as cool, like anybody of all races around the world looks at Bruce Lee and goes, yeah, that is a cool guy. Like that's like, that was our Superman for me and so many people growing up. I think you just I guess that's what it represents, is like, oh, well, it's not possible for me, but it's possible for an Asian guy to actually be cool. All right, that's something. I mean, that's really what it boils down to for me. I mean, I don't know if I'm really hitting on your question, but
I'm just curious where the idea of kung fu, I mean, what it meant for you personally. So in other words, it was a possible role model, or at least someone who made it in that way.
Exactly. It feels like, even though it's a very specific thing, there's like obviously Bruce Lee specifically, but like there's the physicality of it. There's the personal characteristics of someone like that, of that he's ferocious and he's heroic and he's unforgiving on his enemies, and also cool on top of all that. And I think as someone who, growing up as like Asian American boy, specifically, there isn't a lot you have to kind of I had to latch onto in terms of thinking I had access to anything cool. There's nothing cool about me. Like, people don't look at me and think cool guy. So just to see, his physicality, his performance, his face, his body, to know he existed, it's like, well, he's our kind of avatar. We have, like, I could just, touch the hem of his pants, and I think just by association, it felt like, okay, if other people see that and then they go, well, this guy's not Bruce Lee, obviously, but maybe he kind of casts a coolness shadow over the rest of us.
Well, it gives you a certain level of protection. I mean, I kind of felt that, I don't look like a kung fu guy either, but no one else knows that. I mean, no stranger knows that. Exactly. So they don't know that I might just, kind of whip out some moves, right? If they dare to touch me. So I've always felt, oh, lights came on.
Okay.
Can you do
like?
No,
you don't want it on?
No, I don't want it on. Okay. My son. Here. Yeah.
That is so cute. He doesn't look like that anymore, I assume.
No. This is when it's about cute. 10 years ago. Yeah. Anyway. So you were born in Taiwan, right?
I was born here. I was born in LA. Yeah.
So in Irvine or?
I was born in actually like at a Kaiser hospital in Hollywood, I think.
Oh, you mean on Sunset?
Weird. Yeah, on Sunset.
Oh, yeah.
So. And
you grew up with what races? I mean, you grew up in a Chinese family.
I grew up. I grew up in West LA in Mar Vista, so near Culver City, and my parents spoke Taiwanese only at home, actually, to us for a while, but then eventually when I started going to school, it became English. And I at my the first place I lived, it was pretty mixed. I would say a lot of white and Hispanic kids, and then we moved to Palos Verdes when I started high school, or a little before I started high school, and that was a much there's a lot more Asians in PV. My high school was probably like a kind of a weird transition.
You mean to be surrounded by more Asians than before? Why was it weird? Was it a good weird, bad weird, or just kind of weird?
Yeah, all of the above. Good because I think in some ways it felt like I'd gone from a place, for whatever reason back then, just very few East Asians in my elementary and middle school. I don't know the percentage, but there weren't a lot of us, and so there was just I don't know, I guess more kids that would have a similar experience, that would have a lunch that might smelled like mine, or that I felt like if they came into my house, they might not think your house smells weird. They're like, oh, my house smells like that too. That's because my mom's cooking the same thing. So that was great. I in high school, I had a very I had friends of all different, races, but it was nice to see, to know that there were some kids that really would understand lots of aspects of my experience. So that was cool. But also it was weird then all of a sudden to have there's so many, and then when I went to Berkeley, it's even more. It's like 40% Asian. Oh, wow. I don't know.
Well, I asked because as I grew up in Chinatown, and I grew up with Chinese movies. So my screen heroes were all Chinese. I mean, they were villains too, and bad Chinese, of course. There were bad Chinese and good Chinese and some in between. And there were lovers were Chinese. And Kung Fu, Wang Fei Hong, the Kung Fu hero, the mythical Kung Fu hero was Chinese. And when I got older, and especially when I started working in media and being connected with other Asian American filmmakers, I learned that not everybody grew up around Chinese, and it's a different experience, like you were describing, and where there was a yearning or a attachment to someone like Bruce Lee, who was the cool Chinese guy, because there were no other cool Chinese guys before that. And I found that fascinating. And it reminds me of an interview I did with Ang Lee, because part of my discussion with him was, so why, and this is in the 2000s, it's a different time than it is now. And now we have more Chinese American filmmakers breaking through. But back then in the 2000s and 1990s, there wasn't. It was Ang Lee, and I said, so Ang Lee, I didn't call him Ang Lee, I said Ang. So why is it that these foreign directors like John Woo, foreign actors, foreign born, like Jet Li, Chow Yun-fat, or Jackie Chan, why are you all making it whereas the American-born Chinese artists aren't making it quite to the level you are? And he goes, well, because we're surrounded by people like us. We're surrounded by a culture that we are part of. And that gives us our strength. And I didn't, that was a revelation to me. And I had to really think about, well, that's what my parents always told me, find strength in your people, and I mean, it's a different time period and it's a different way of thinking, but it's so true to so many people today. Anyway, I just wanted to bring that up.
No, that was a great moment in the film. I remember that was a revelation to me too. It's like, oh, why have I never thought about that? I mean, he's not, he spent a good portion of his life making movies in Asia where he's not an outsider. So he doesn't have the same sort of mentality. It doesn't feel marginalized. So he comes over here and already has a very developed sense of who he is as an artist, and that his projects will be taken seriously because he is who he is. So
it's don't give me shit, right? It's like, what? Are you serious? It's like, no, I don't take that. I just got a chat note. Did you notice that we should be breaking for questions?
All right.
Also, I think I'm getting really dark. I'm going to turn on some light.
Yeah, now
I'm ready for the light. Yeah, now.
Yeah, I don't think I can see myself. Is that better? Is that too much?
That's great.
Okay, all right. I need my
You look
camera
amazing.
crew here. Oh, well, thank you. So yeah, I just see the note here. We can break for questions.
We actually had quite a few questions from the audience, so I just wanted to make sure that we hopefully are able to answer as many as possible. Thank you both so much for this great conversation. So
And
sorry I
get this
didn't
book.
get your photos. Yes,
wait,
get
wait,
that
wait,
book.
We have to plug this book.
Yeah,
It's so good. Everyone should read this book.
Here we go.
Please get your copy of Hollywood Chinese directly from Angel City Press. Dara's going to drop that into the chat, and then we would love it. You know, Book Soup is our bookseller for the series, so if you could get your copy of Interior Chinatown from Book Soup, that would be wonderful. If it's not possible, then you know, support your local brick and mortar whenever possible. We want to keep those bookstores open. So
can I
I'm
mention
gonna
something since you're doing the sell. And
I'm doing the sell.
Since Angel City Press, they're in Santa Monica, and actually my marketing director lives in Echo Park, just over the hill. What we've done in the past is when you order the book, there's a section where you special directions or something where you can say, I would like an autograph, and I would like it signed to Charles, best wishes, or to mom, happy birthday from, you know, whatever. So you can do that at Angel City Press when you order online. And he brings the books to me, I sign them, we have a little party. We did this, and now that, you know, restrictions are lifted, we can actually be closer. Anyway,
awesome.
Great, yes.
So there's the sell.
Okay, signed copy of Hollywood Chinese directly from Angel City Press. Wonderful. That sounds amazing. Okay, so I'm gonna jump off a question for both of you that we'd like both of you to answer. One of the viewers is especially interested in, actually, I'm gonna make it for both of you, your process for coming up with ideas, thinking through the story, breaking a story, and any craft books you might recommend on writing and screenwriting. So whoever wants to take it first, and then we'll go to the next person.
You're the writer. Well, yeah, I mean,
I think, I'll go first so you thinking time. Ooh, that's a lot. Craft books, and what were the other things?
Maybe start with the craft book. Like, do you have a craft book rec? And then we'll go on to the rest. For screenwriting or writing, or both.
I have read Save the Cat, and I do like that book a lot. I find it very helpful. I have also, I'll just say that. I like that book. I read Sid Field's book, of course.
What about this one?
Yes.
What about this? What
Yes.
about this gem? Yeah.
Sid Field. Read Sid Field. And yeah, can't go wrong. I feel like there's more to that question.
So then those were the books. And then how do you come up with ideas? How do you think through a story? Breaking a story, which is a term I've never heard before. Is that a movie thing?
Yeah, I think it's a TV movie thing. Come up with ideas is a very painful process in which I bang my head against my desk for several years, and then one idea comes out. Then you write a book about it. So that's how that happens. I think the best ideas come from places that feel like you don't know where they came from, because they're usually from your subconscious. Like when I'm trying to write, I am usually using the wrong part of my brain. And so I think it's often when I'm like getting in and out of the shower, or getting in and out of my car. It's like a transitional moment. For some reason, that's when your brain decides, I think because your machinery is not choking off the flow of creativity, that's often when I actually get ideas, in terms of like things that feel like that's interesting. Because a lot of times I sit at the typewriter and it's just typing, it's not actually writing. Breaking story.
Now, is this an actual typewriter?
Yeah. No, I
Okay.
guess you're right. It's
Okay.
I'm
Well, I don't
miming
know.
typing, which you
You
can't see.
could, yeah, you could be on a typewriter. I don't know. So when you get the ideas, do you instantly record them? Like, do you put them on your phone, or like, how does that work?
I do. I mean, I wrote a short story once, just like in my car on dictation, which is very dangerous, probably illegal. Don't do that. But like, I was basically just, I was having the ideas and I was like, I'm not going to forget this one. So I just started talking into my phone, and that worked. Although it made some hilarious typos. Yeah, I'll send emails to myself. I've learned not to wait, because usually I'm like, I'll remember that in the morning. I never remember it in the morning.
Never.
Yeah,
I know, never.
I scribble it on Post-its, like, because I think there's something too about handwriting my ideas. Like if I'm typing, it's like very linear. So I like to scribble something sometimes. But and breaking story, that's it's like a screen TV film thing. And that's a relatively new skill to me, is like this idea of don't think about it. Like writing a novel, I'm just like letting it swirl in my head for a really long time, and then just hoping that I can sort of extract it in some way that makes sense. I think once I got into a TV writer's room for the first time, I realized there's a systematic way of doing that, that they kind of, you learn the craft of it, that I'm, still learning. So, yeah, that's this whole other thing.
Okay. Arthur, do you want to talk to that one? What do you do with your ideas? Where do they come from?
Well, first of all, I got this new light and I'm looking like Cheeto Man.
You look amazing.
Well, I'm a filmmaker. Is that better?
That was good.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
It says the temperature.
Much better.
Wow, it's a great light. Anyway, Amazon, it changed the temperature, right? I'm not Cheeto Man anymore.
Yeah, you did. You did. Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So, one thing, I was a fellow at the American Film Institute, a directing fellow, and I hated it, but I loved it. I hated it because they really, at that time, this is 1984, maybe, and there's a different curriculum possibly than it is today, different people, definitely different dean, different teachers. But they were really drilling into us the 3-act structure. I think we used Sid Field's book. I don't think so. I'm not sure. But it was the same concept, plot point, 7 minutes, the rise, climax, and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, oh, God, this is like, come on, give me a break. Where's the creativity? Where's the expansion of artistic ideas? But what they did say was, drill this into your head, get it down packed, and when you get out of here, we expect you to break all the rules. But know the rules first. Know the rules first. Know the basics first. And that was so Chinese, at least the Chinese upbringing I had. I went to Chinese school in Chinatown for 7 years. So, with the punishment of the, whacking on your ruler, all that. It was capital punishment all the time. But it was all about knowing the basics for 7 years in Chinese school. But they never said to me, then go out there and break the rules. But AFI said, then go out there and make us proud and break all the rules. So that was an important lesson for me, and I carried that through to my work today. In terms of, so I didn't have a textbook, and actually I had asked some writer friends of mine, maybe Charles, you have some ideas that I'm trying to be a little more creative in my writing. And I said, are there any help books, self-help books? I got a couple ideas, but if you can think of any self-help books on personal storytelling, that sort of thing, it'd be great. But Hollywood Chinese is my second book, and my first book is Forbidden City, USA, which is about Chinatown nightclubs during World War II. Both books are what people often call coffee table books, and the focus is on the visuals. And for me, for both of my books, the way I knew that I had a book in the works when I knew I had visuals. Like with Hollywood Chinese earlier, I said, I had all this material, thousands of pieces of ephemera, cultural ephemera that really tell stories. And in creating Hollywood Chinese, it was creating a visual journey with this material. So what I did, not so much for Forbidden City USA, but with Hollywood Chinese, what I did was learn a publishing desktop application called InDesign. And I laid out the whole book with my visual ideas, my visual material first. And this is how I approach my editing in my film work, is because I edit my own work, is I always run a test while I'm editing, whether or not the story makes any kind of narrative sense without the sound, without dialogue. And that's a test I give to myself. And not that, you won't get all the nuances that dialogue can give you and all the facts and all the every little idea, but is there a visual journey that the viewer can take without sound? Because for me, filmmaking and now books is a visual journey. So, and I'm working on a third book, and I only am working on the third book because I have visual material. And I wouldn't, and so I approach writing a little differently than someone who works mainly with words. I think, does that answer the question that was asked?
Yeah, absolutely. And it actually leads me into the next question, which is that it seems Forbidden City would be ripe for a series adaptation. And has there been any interest shown in making that happen?
No. Shockingly enough. And it's not that I haven't tried, although, I would have myself to blame. If I really wanted something, it would happen. I know that. And I'm not I do mostly documentaries, but I have, I've made the documentary for Forbidden City USA. So I've done that. And I finished that in '89. And right away, I knew that there was something more, not something more, but there was a narrative film here somewhere because of the character situations. Back then, the reaction I got was, okay, yeah, but we need a white protagonist. I mean,
right,
which isn't surprising back then in the early 90s. That's kind of like what you had to put up with. When Crazy Rich Asians exploded on the screen and made millions of dollars in the box office, I tried to resurrect that with people who could push it. I'm not going to name some names, but who could push it if they wanted to. And there was not even a lukewarm response. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know who's out there watching this, but get my book. If you think it would, let's talk. I mean, I hate sounding so Hollywood, but I think it would be great. And I've got all the research material. Anyway, get the book. You'll see.
Okay. Yeah. Well, you got to be Hollywood to make things happen. Am I right, Charles?
Yeah.
I'm
always.
You're so Hollywood.
I'm on calls right now. I just made a deal while we were talking.
Did you really? You did not.
Yeah. I think Charlie, you kind of answered this with this whole idea of like Kung Fu guy, and we had this question come up, and I did kind of want you to speak to it, even though I kind of knew what the answer was going to be. But I'm thinking about it in terms of like tokenism to some extent, like this idea that there's only room for one Chinese story or one Chinese writer, or you know what I mean? Like I know Noel Alumid is in the audience, and I heard him speak to this, where when he was trying to sell his first book, it was like, well, we already have like the Filipino gay love story, like as if there could only be one. And I think that you're everywhere since the National Book Award win, but you've always kind of been everywhere. You were like a 30 under 30 guy. And, you spoke to Trevor Noah. You're kind of all over the place. It's like, I can't open my email without seeing an event that you're at. And I'm like,
Sorry.
what? I love it, obviously, because I love you and I know what went into this book. But so if you think about it in that context, like, how do you feel about potentially being Kung Fu guy for like the next generation of like Asian American kids? Like, do you ever think about that, or does it make you like, you know what I'm saying?
I think I know what you're saying. I have never had that thought. I don't imagine there are a lot of kids who want to grow up and be a writer. I wish there were more. I mean, I'm sure there are some, but I think about that actually specifically with my kids. It's like, how do I look cool to them? Talking to Trevor Noah was a good step in the right direction.
That's a good one. Yeah, that was a good one.
But that's wearing off because that was like over a year ago now. So I have to do something else now. So no, I mean, I do think about, though, like, I have had the chance of talking in the last, 14 months to a lot of people over Zoom, and a lot of young writers, ranging from like high school to undergrads to MFAs and to post MFAs. And it is both like inspiring and a little bit weird to think, or to hear from people like, I read your book, it meant a lot. Or when people say, I read, an earlier book 10 years ago, and that made me want to start writing. That's kind of mind-blowing. And it's also like, oh wow, that's what happened to me. I read people's work and so that feels really amazing, because that's kind of, you couldn't ask for a better gift, as a writer and as a reader, to think, I wanted to be in conversation with people, both literally and on the page, and now it's happening. So that's really neat. And then, the last bit of it is, I just also realized that I'm like out of touch with things. Sort of like, I don't leave my house. I'm kind of a middle-aged dad now. I am a middle-aged dad, and so I'm like, oh, there are actual adults, like, who, like, it still confuses me. And like, how are you already out of college when you were born in that year? I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I'm older.
Right. Well, if it helps, no one's leaving their house, so I wouldn't feel that bad about it. As far as being in your house all the time.
True.
Arthur, I love Flower Drum Song, but I know the original musical film were seen as problematic by some, and the book of the 2002 revival with Leah Salonga was revised. Thoughts?
Yeah, Flower Drum Song is a difficult conundrum. Well, I didn't need difficult. It's a conundrum, because conundrums are difficult, right? And you love it, you hate it, or somewhere in between. And you're talking to somebody who loved the film. I hadn't seen the original Broadway production in 1958, which was full of yellowface characters. And I only know the 1961 film and the 2002 revival. I think, I was on the National Film Preservation Board at the Library of Congress for about 6 years. And what we do is one of the tasks we have is to nominate and recommend films for the film registry every year. And I think every year there are about 25, and I may be mistaken about that, but there's a set number. In one year, I nominated Flower Drum Song. And my nomination statement was that I think this is one of the earliest, if not earliest, films from Hollywood where audiences got a chance to see behind the colorful facades of Chinatown, where, except for one actor, all the other actors who played Chinese American characters were Asian American or Asian. And that's important. It's a milestone. And I think, and they were a mixture of characters. They were immigrants. They were first generation Chinese Americans. They were second generation characters, and they ran the gamut. And I loved the film because of that. Part of it was shot in my neighborhood, and it was wonderful to see my neighborhood in the Hollywood musical, because I didn't see the Broadway production. To see, having seen films like the Fu Manchu series, especially the Boris Karloff edition in the 30s, and then to see Flower Drum Song with Chinese American characters. And really, if you dissect the film, they're really talking about immigration issues. They're talking about assimilation issues and cultural conflicts between generations. And those are powerful messages. It's just covered with song and dance. Granted, it was written by Rogers and Hammerstein, but it was based on the book by C.Y. Lee, a Chinese American novelist. And actually, if you read the novel, it's nothing like the film at all. In fact, the novel has suicide. It's really, actually, the novel is very devastating. And Flower Drum Song, the movie, is very fun and lively. And heck, I know so many people who, had a great puberty because of Nancy Kwan singing "I Enjoy Being a Girl." I mean, Chinese Americans, Asian Americans. So what can be awful about that for at least people going through puberty and getting excited about Nancy Kwan? And Nancy Kwan, by the way, I interviewed her. She's really terrific. Charles.
There's some great interviews.
Thank you. She's just, anyway, so yeah, and the 2002 revival, I think it's great. I loved it. I've seen it like 3 times here at the Mark Taper when it first premiered, and then also on Broadway. And it's a different take. And David Henry Hwang did some very revolutionary changes. And, he had to get permission from the Rogers and Hammerstein estate to do this. So it was all approved. But I like it. I like the old version too. But I know exactly why there might be a problem with some people because of certain images that it portrays. And by the way, the Juanita Hall role was supposed to be played by Anna May Wong, but she died. FYI, just a little trivia.
Little trivia.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got 2 more, and then I'm going to let you gents go. So this is a question for both of you. What's your take on when/why Hollywood's portrayals of Asians changed to be so derogatory? In the 1910s and 20s, one of the biggest sex symbols of Hollywood was Asian, Seisu Hayakawa, and then fast forward a few decades to Mickey Rooney and Breakfast at Tiffany's and Long Duck Dong. Like, what happened, do you think?
Well, I think I'll let the historian expert talk, but
I'd say follow the money. Basically, follow the money, follow the politics, follow what was going on in the country. You would not see Mickey Rooney's portrayal of his character today. We'll cross our fingers about that. Cecile Hayakawa, after his Oscar nomination for Bridge on River Kwai, never had, didn't continue escalating in his career, but I think it's part of the industry, part of what the industry thinks would be successful, thinks what the audience wants. And, us as ticket buying audience members, we have that power, and we just need to exercise that power. I mean, that won't change everything in the economics of Hollywood, but that is a tool that we have as audience members and as consumers. So it's really hard to outline in the chat like this, but it's a very complex situation that deals with cultural, political, and social issues. It's very complex. I don't want to make it, I don't want to simplify it with an easy answer.
Right. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Charlie, you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm just listening,
Nope.
taking it in. I think it's so interesting what they're saying.
Yeah. So we're going to close out with this one, and just because it's in celebration of AAPI Heritage Month, and I think that we need to acknowledge the wave of violence against Asian Americans that's happening in the U.S. right now, and has historically happened for a very long time. But I think a lot about affinity groups and in terms of affinity groups. And I hear so much, we did the event with Brenda Gerard and Miriam Gerba, and they were talking about going to therapy and how they really prioritize finding therapists who are women of color, because it was like, you didn't have to explain yourself. Like, it wasn't like playing catch up with this person. And I wonder, I think how much easier it is for us to understand communities that we have direct relationships with. And I wonder how we get other people to care. Like how do we get people to care? Like, how do we stop this? Like, what do we do? And I'm wondering if maybe you could both offer a suggestion for, what should we do to support the AAPI community? Like, what is one like direct action that we can take to support people at this time and going forward?
Wow. Well, we could change the world. We had an answer. Okay, just to give you something simple, write a check.
Yeah.
Or charge it.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's something really simple,
good.
easy, and it's quick, and it's an action step. But there is so much more to be done.
Yeah. Okay. Write a check. I like it. What do you think, Charlie?
I mean, Arthur took my answer. No, I'm just kidding. I think this is going to sound shameless, but I think buy books, support artists. I think storytelling is also another way that you let someone, maybe the most powerful way that you let someone inside of the consciousness that they may see as other. And so it sounds self-serving, but I think it's really true.
I think those are both great answers, and I totally agree. I think that, like, if I know anything about the world, it's because I read a book. I picked up a book and read a story. So thank you both so much. We're all losing the light, and
yeah, I'm just
you
still
look
ahead
cooler.
now.
Yeah, you're like, you just look cooler as it gets darker and darker.
It is really cool.
It's totally true. I want to thank you both for agreeing to this conversation and to obviously enjoying each other's company so much. I love it. And I want to remind everyone to purchase your books, Angel City Press, request a personal signing or autograph statement from Arthur. Get your copy of Interior Chinatown at Book Soup or your local brick and mortar. I should let you know that WeHo Reads is a celebrated literary series presenting new and noteworthy authors of interest to the West Hollywood community. WeHo Reads is presented by the City of West Hollywood's Arts Division. For more details on full program and events coming up, please visit weho.org/WeHo Reads. And thank you to everyone who participated, who watched. This is going to be up on the WeHo Arts channel on YouTube. So share the link with your friends, invite people. You'll be able to enjoy this conversation for years to come, I hope. And that's all I've got. So did you want to say a goodbye? Do you have any burning desire, as we say, in a program that I might or might not be involved with?
I wanted to thank you, Amanda, and you, Arthur, for writing your amazing book. And I really learned so much, and it's such an enjoyable thing to read. And I just feel like I'll be going back to it for a long time. And Amanda and Dare and WeHo Reads, thanks for allowing me to be part of this. It's really an honor to talk to Arthur.
Amazing.
And
thank you so much.
The honor is mine as well for all that Charles is saying, including Charles. And thanks for bringing me back to the SROs. It's a part of my life that, and I encourage readers to pick up the book if you haven't already. Not only for its amazing writing style. In fact, I never got a chance to ask you, how did you do these runoff sentences for so long? It's like, whoa. I mean, I actually had to say, I can't just read this on the fly. I have to sit down and read this because the paragraph is one sentence. But thank you all, and especially to Charles. This has just been a lot of fun.
So guess what? I have the SRO photo from my email. So do we want to just show that to close out? Because that one I do have.
Okay,
The
what
one
do
you
you
shared
have?
with, is it your uncle? Was it your uncle? The one that you shared with us
Oh, my
in our
music
email?
teacher. Does it say lesson or something? Yeah, there he is. Right.
You see it?
That's my music teacher, and those charcoal drawings up there are his. And this is the instrument. It's called a yangqin or yongkam or butterfly harp that I took lessons for a long time on. And I think I need to pick it up. But this is his one room. You see his bed there. That's his closet on this side. Underneath the charcoal drawings, you see photographs of his family in China that he eventually returned to. So this is just one side of his room. The other side is a sink and his closet where he keeps his food stuff in. And this is a very small room. But his whole life was here. It's amazing. And I never really appreciated it in terms of this texture until I read Charles' book, and it brought it all back.
Full circle. I love it. We got one photo in, guys. All right,
Okay,
everybody.
thank
Thank you
you.
so much.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye,
Take care.
everybody.
Bye. Thank you.